We are going to be talking about how to sort out your finances on divorce or dissolution. So in terms of ways to resolve your finances on divorce, there are a couple of things that I'll be looking at. Is working out how much professional help you need, assessing when separating your finances could be easier, sorting out your divorce or dissolution yourself, signs that separating your finances may be complicated, and do's and don'ts of divorce or dissolution. So that's kind of when we're talking about you really are ready. And finally, I'll be looking at separation agreements instead of divorce or dissolution. So how you work out whether you need professional help or not. Well, no doubt, sometimes it's common sense. When working out how much help you need, there are a number of things you may want to think about, or a number of options, I suppose. First, you can arrange everything on your own or use an online service. Second, you can arrange for one or two advice sessions with a solicitor, but sort out the form filling and paperwork yourself. Otherwise, if form filling and paperwork are done by solicitors, as you expect, the cost will no doubt rocket up or shoot up. Third, you can use, no doubt, a mediator. It's basically someone who's independent, not a solicitor. The person could be trained as a solicitor, but the role of a mediator is not to give you legal advice, but the person who's usually an independent, impartial third party to help you and your ex-partner, it could be a husband, wife, or civil partner, to reach an agreement. So it's really the purpose is to accept the fact that there's a problem, but amicably sort things out instead of it's costing you too much. Second, or more like fourth, you can use a solicitor to help you throughout the whole process. If you have lots of face-to-face meetings and phone calls, and especially if it takes many months for you to agree, sorting out your financial settlement could get very expensive. If you can, try to avoid arguing with your ex-partner through your solicitor. And I know it can be very difficult, especially when you're in a mood to separate, both in terms of your finances, in terms of emotion, and of course physically when you don't want to see each other at all. But in fact, the moment you see each other, you cringe and you get infuriated instead of that love and affection that you used to have. However, let's move on to assessing when separating your finances could be easier. There is no, I'm afraid, straightforward rule about when you might be better off sorting out your own divorce or dissolution on your own, and when you might be better using professional help. There is no single rule at all. But lots of breakups become bitter or lengthy sometimes because couples can agree how to split the finances. In that case, you might need some professional help. And reaching an agreement about your finances is likely to be easier if you, at first, both agree to the divorce or dissolution, and you don't have children, or your children are grown up and don't financially depend on you, or one of you doesn't financially depend on the other. And you agree how your property and pensions should be split, or you can discuss the different options, amicably, friendly way, without being aggressive with your ex-partner. So that's kind of assessing when separating your finances should be easier. But when sorting out your divorces or dissolution, it should be done by yourself. So sorting out your divorce or dissolution yourself. If you live in England or Wales, you can choose to sort out your divorce or dissolution entirely on your own, or you can use a low-cost online service. So there is online service available. Yeah, more people are doing it actually these days, although most still use a solicitor, mediator, or other professional for help and advice. For example, you can't use it if you have children under the age of 16 or if you're making a financial claim against each other, partly because it gets more complicated. Because we're dealing with, or you're dealing with, a share of the house, even pension, or even money that he or she might have, and you think you rightfully own bits of assets and money. You can appear in court as a personal petitioner without having to use a solicitor. So nothing stops you there. The advantage of sorting out your divorce dissolution yourself is that it's cheaper and you have direct control over what you do. But unless you and your ex-partner can agree who gets what fairly and without arguing, it might not be the best option. So there we are. So if you don't agree, things can be very complicated. If you agree, it makes it much easier. But let's now move on to signs that separating your finances may be complicated instead of it being easy. So yeah, signs that make your separating your finances complicated. Let's have a look. If your financial situation is complicated, separating your finances and reaching an agreement could take some time, then you're more likely to be in need of professional help. For example, let's say one or both of you own business. That makes it complicated. One of you depends financially on the other. Again, there is an issue of ethics, especially if you've been looking after children and you've lost out to help the other one. So obviously that makes it complicated. One of you does not agree to the divorce or dissolution. So there we are. One says, I want a divorce, while the other says, darling, no. I love you so much, I don't want a divorce. Then in that situation, what do you do? Obviously. The other thing could be is you have children who still financially depend on you. Again, that may make things complicated for you. Or you have been married or in a civil partnership for more than 5 years. Or one of you has a medical problem or disability that affects your ability to earn an income. There are other issues, no doubt. For example, one of you has given up work to bring up your children, which affects your ability to earn an income. Think about it. Giving up your job and looking after your children is a life-changing experience. And no doubt, you've lost your opportunity to earn a living for yourself. So we can think about looking after children and think about looking after the household. So one loses and the other one gains. So the other one gains means that the other one's carry on working. So naturally, the one who's working is still in the labour market, working away, earning a salary. And the one who isn't working still obviously loses the opportunity to work. So out of the labour market, but also looking after the children as a carer. So the person who ends up looking after the children in the long term loses out more. So those are the type of things that the court will be looking at to see whether it's fair or not in terms of money. Okay? So let's move on to do's and don'ts of divorce or dissolution. Yeah, unless your split is amicable, it might be tempting to punish your ex-husband when you are negotiating your financial settlement. So let's look at things that you might want to think of doing rather than not doing, and we'll come back to not doing a bit later. 1, try to reach agreement with your ex-partner about who will pay bills in the short term. Try to agree as much as you can with your ex-partner. It will save time and no doubt money. And the other thing is, be aware. Be aware that what you think is fair and how your money might be divided in law, but can be two complicated, completely different things in practice. So yeah. So let's go back to do's. Try to reach an agreement. Try to agree as much as you can with the ex-partner. And be aware that what you think is fair and how your money might be divided in law can be two completely different things. Okay, so that's about do's. Now, in terms of don't try and get back at your ex-partner by doing things like running up debts on joint accounts or freezing an account without telling them, or not making payments you've made agreed to. And the other thing is, don't make a decision that could make you feel better in the short term, but which could be bad for you and your ex-partner in the long term. So don't make a decision that could make you feel better in the short term, but in the long term it could be different. Because, of course, when we are finding ourselves in such difficulties, no doubt, it gets very complicated. So now let's move on to international divorce and dissolution. The law on divorce and dissolution varies around the UK. Depending on where you were each born and have lived in the past, you might be able to get divorced or dissolve your civil partnership in a different part of the UK to where you currently live. You might also be able to get divorced or dissolve your civil partnership in a country outside of the UK if you or your ex-partner was born or lived there. If you want to do this, talk to a solicitor who specialises in international divorce or dissolution. So because it gets complicated, that's what it is. The other thing is separation agreements instead of divorce or dissolution. A separation agreement is useful if you haven't yet decided whether to divorce or dissolve your civil partnership, or if you can't yet do so. It's an agreement that typically sets out the financial arrangements that you put in place while you are separate. It is an agreement. Yeah. So now let's look at slightly your next step. Yeah. Depending on the nature of your divorce or dissolution and how complicated it is likely to be, you can choose one of the options obviously outlined above, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm not going to be going further. Okay, so for now, let me just take a couple of seconds and I'll be back and briefly summarize what we talked about. But what will be helpful, I guess, before I go and talk briefly on cohabitation, is remind ourselves of what members of the public think about the topic on hire purchase.
Long-term basis, in my view, is I would buy the item, use it, keep it or sell it, and then that would work out for me. But for people who can't do that, it's probably the best option or the only option. But you have to consider all the other hidden charges which are involved as well, like insurance and other charges like small bits exploding for tools. You have to then separately use the wear and tear parts, usable parts, not replaceable parts, like blades or sandpaper or wherever you hire. So in that way, you're really paying nearly as much as what you would pay to buy a new tool.
I don't know a lot about hire purchase because
There we are when it comes to hire purchase. So hopefully you had the opportunity to understand about hire purchase and what members of the public think. But of course, we have also been talking about divorce. But now let's move to options in terms of financial advice and separation when you are cohabiting. So let's talk briefly about the subject. So the issues that I'll be talking about is using a mediator for separation or whether to use a solicitor for separation when you are cohabiting, or whether you should be using an accountant or a financial advisor or anyone else. So, yep, let's explore those things for our benefit, and then we can talk about really go deep into our subject in terms of cohabitation and financial advice. Yeah, a mediator can help you and your ex-partner to sort out children and financial matters. They don't take sides or give advice. Instead, what they do, they help you work towards an agreement. An increasing number of solicitors specializing in family law are also trained mediators. Mediation works best where you trust each other to be open and honest. So, if you and your ex-partner can't talk about who should look after the children or how you will divide your money, mediation, I'm afraid, not suitable for you. Mediators can't give legal advice, although some of them might be lawyers, but whilst they have taken the role of a mediator, they're not allowed to give advice because it goes against the ethics. That means you should see a solicitor before or during mediation so you know your rights. And if you want a legally binding agreement, you need to get a solicitor to draw it up for you. And there are so many ways you can find it. If you Google it, a Family Mediation Council's website is a good one. And if you live in Northern Ireland, Family Mediation Northern Ireland website are there too for you. Now, let's move on to using a solicitor for separation. And mind you, this part really isn't about divorce, but there are elements that might be similar. A solicitor can give you advice on your rights if you want to make a claim against your ex-partner or for a share of the family home or other assets. You can use them to give independent legal advice. To give you independent legal advice, either if you are negotiating settlement through mediation or considering even taking legal action, they can do that. Negotiate on your behalf directly with your ex-partner, partner solicitor, and of course draw up a legal agreement based on what you've agreed independently with your ex-partner. So solicitor may give you also information about your financial entitlement. So some things that you may not have thought about, knowing your circumstance, you'll have that opportunity to do so. So now, let's now move on to using a family law lawyer in a collaborative way. Collaborative family lawyers are specifically trained solicitors who can help you reach agreement through a series of meetings with your ex-partner. So you and your ex-partner will each hire your own collaborative family lawyers. You all sign an agreement not to go to court. So the purpose is to avoid going to court. And you agree to work together to resolve the issue between you among yourselves. So no, I will sue you in court, not that approach. And of course, there'll be meetings face to face with all four of you present. So it's done in a very supportive way where you're fully informed of your rights and you have your own legal representation. But of course, the whole idea behind it is not to fight. Okay, it's all about trying to find a way to settle, really. Simple as that. And they're not often used when cohabiting couples split up because the cost can be high as well. So again, in the end, options can cost. So now let's move on to at what point do you use a financial advisor or whether you need a financial advisor. Okay, so now a financial advisor can be helpful, can advise also on issues such as how to divide assets in the most tax efficient way and how to invest the proceeds of a house sale or similar you'll have to pay for their services, no doubt. It could be normally hourly or a fixed rate, so you really need to ask them first before you decide. Their specialist advice and expertise may be valuable if your financial situation is very complicated and you have joint assets. You just think about those things. And you can find an independent financial advisor, no doubt, and in fact, they all have to be regulated. Being a financial advisor is a regulated profession, and if you're in no doubt about whether the financial advisor is independent and qualified, you can always contact the Financial Conduct Authority to find out more about the advisor. So that's kind of what it is about in terms of what we talked about: a divorce, what happens, and how you generally deal with sorting out your separate finances when you're separating as a cohabitee, and also how to sort out your money when you are divorcing, no doubt. And let's not forget, we have also earlier on talked about a car and a hire purchase car, and what hire purchase car mean. We went through kind of the burden that you have when you think about hire purchase car. We also think about you have to pay at least a third before you get the right to be taken to court for the creditor to recover the money. We've also talked about the conditions in which that you obtain your full entitlement, and don't forget, you must also pay the option to purchase the car. So there we are. So here we are. So we've talked about a great deal on your money. We talked about a lot. Now it is near to the end. Now I do want to, before I go, remind you about what the members of the public think on hire purchase. Let's remind ourselves again. And last thing I want for you to feel is that you're not quite sure what now hire purchase mean, because I went through it in detail and also made sure anything that is uncertain has been clarified for your benefit. But let's recap on the views of members of the public on that subject.
For me, it's not a good thing because I'm in a position where I can afford to buy stuff, but long-term basis, my opinion is I would buy the item, use it,